A lot of the people leaving Guatemala don't speak Spanish. They speak indigenous native languages. So I don't know where you're getting caught up in the Spanish. That's not in Spanish. We're not talking about Spanish. We're talking about indigenous people.
But even before,
it's your conquered mind that keeps interjecting Spanish.
My conquered mind? What does that mean?
Your questions. I can tell by your questions.
Well, I just like to ask challenging questions of
They're
everybody.
not challenging. They're unwoke questions. They're remedial. They're shallow questions. You don't got real questions. So you can think that to yourself. We're telling you, your questions are remedial.
You haven't even done research.
You need to read a little bit.
I'm asking you.
I know, but if you did research, you would have better questions.
You guys just seem really very hostile to the questions. I'm just asking questions and looking for answers. What's up, guys? Nuance Bro checking in. We're here in San Francisco, California at the Families Belong Together March. Let's go out there and talk to people, see what's going on. So why are we out here today?
We're fighting against injustice for children and families at the border and just all over America.
Sure. And what's that injustice?
Detaining children and saying that you're putting families together, but really you're just jailing families together.
Sure. So, I mean, they actually, because of the Flores decision, right, they had to actually not detain the kids and they had to let them go, and that was part of the controversy because they couldn't keep families together in detention centers.
Right.
What do you think we should do to combat that? Like, what's the solution here?
I mean, I'm not necessarily a person to come up with a solution by any means. That's why we are supposed to vote for people that will represent us and come up with these great ideas. I don't run for any office because I'm not the person to come up with them. There are a lot of things you can do that involve not putting people in tents or jails or anything like that. And if people are seeking legal asylum, they really shouldn't be jailed, right?
Sure. So, I mean, when we vote for people, we vote for their policies, right? So we have to have some idea of what kind of policies we support. So what are you looking for in a candidate when they propose policies that deal with this crisis? What are you looking for specifically?
You know, just I always think about Kamala Harris, like she's been really up at the forefront of a lot of this stuff that I've seen. Mostly, I just see her because I follow her too. That helps.
Do you support abolishing ICE?
You know, I honestly don't know enough about ICE to say whether I want to abolish it or not, although I have to say that a lot of the practices are not great, so it definitely needs some rethought. If it's not abolished, it definitely needs to be kind of reorganized or figured out a little bit better and less violent towards people, I would say.
Sure. And you talked about how people are coming here and they're seeking legal asylum, but I think a big part of the problem is a lot of people are coming here and they're not legally going through the asylum process. They're coming over the border illegally first and then claiming asylum when they're caught, instead of going through a legal port of entry at the border and claiming asylum there. What do you think about that?
Well, making easier access points for people would be helpful, but also I know that when it comes to a lot of just dealing with bureaucratic stuff, it's really difficult and you don't necessarily know the correct channels to go through, and if you're really trying to escape something terrible, you're probably not going to be thinking about like, oh, what is the most legal way to do this? You're going to be thinking, what's the best way to get my family out of the worst situation I've seen?
Well, isn't that important if there is a policy of separating, families because they say it's a criminal action, we separate, kids from their parents if they commit criminal action, even here in the United States among U.S. citizens. Isn't it important for them to know that so that they can prevent that from happening?
Well, how are people supposed to be getting that information if they're literally on the run for their lives? Like
through media channels, like the same way they get all the information about claiming asylum in the first place.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, is if you're running for your life, how are you going to be getting any of that information, including a way to legally seek asylum? Like, if you are running for your life, you're not necessarily thinking about all of those things, and you're not going to be able to even access those media channels, right? Like, that's why there need to be easier points of access.
So what are we out here for today?
Well, I'm out here, and I think everybody's out here because we are really horrified by the Trump administration's policies against immigrants, against people of color in general. So I think we have to let everybody know that not all Americans are in favor of the current policies.
Which specific policies against people of color were you referring to specifically?
I think the immigration and the separation of families, a travel ban. I mean,
so specifically towards illegal immigrants, not just people of color in general. You were.
I think people in color in general are under attack because of his rhetoric about Mexican Americans,
He was referring to like illegal immigrants coming over the border, right?
He's referred to a Mexican-American judge in a very negative way. People in his administration have said that perhaps the internment camps could be used again. They were once used. So I just think that there's a general climate, the whole rationalization of that it's both sides that are at fault when it comes to things like, North Carolina. I just think that there's a general climate of, what's the word, scapegoating?
So you have this sign here about Japanese internment. What relation do you see with that situation to what's happening today?
A lot. I mean, clearly it can happen again. It was an executive order in 1942 that put my family into an internment camp for 4 years. And we have fought ever since to educate the American public about what happened. And we always thought we should do this. We should educate the public so it doesn't happen again. Well, clearly it's happening again.
But is it really the same? Because you have, foreign nationals coming here illegally, and then, because that's a crime, and then you're basically prosecuting and arresting based on that crime. Whereas this was actually American citizens and people who are legal residents here, and then without real cause, they actually just they violated all their constitutional rights and put them in internment camps. Is it really the same?
I don't think the citizenship question is the key question here, really. Because once you start going, you can go after anybody.
Well, legal residents as well.
Right. I mean, so I don't demarcate between, we were citizens and they're not. I think that's a real divisive tactic.
Well, no, not just citizens, but like legal, like citizens, legal residents. Those I think those are more protected. But if you come here illegally, that's a crime, right?
I think we all came here. And I know that I have grandparents and ancestors that probably came here illegally.
Probably. You don't know, or?
Well, my grandparents' generation weren't allowed to become citizens until 1954. So,
Well, that's not the same as like immigration, right?
What's the point?
Well, I was just trying to see if it's like the same as what's happening right now.
I believe there's clear parallels, so I think there's a danger.
So why are we out here today?
We are out here to help the people of Mexico, as well as my own family and my own childhood, who, if it was me, it would have happened by the time I was 18. I'm the first generation here from Mexico.
And what's going on with Mexicans today?
They're being screwed in every way we can imagine, being here, being labeled as being illegal and criminals and everything we know. It's a kind of a no-brainer, and it's just pathetic what's going on.
So I was under the impression today was more about the Central Americans who are coming here, because
it's about separating families and bringing families together, wherever it is.
Yeah, but it's not happening with Mexicans specifically, because they usually just get deported right away.
The issue is that the Latin American people, because they're not white and they're not right and right wing, that they're being targeted as criminals, and it's all fear-based and nothing more.
But it is. Oh, go ahead.
Families are being ripped apart. I got to say, as an English Jew, I've seen this before, and I just don't want to see this again.
So what do you think the solution is to this crisis? Like, what should we do as a policy?
That's a good question. I think keep getting out the vote and fighting back, because right now the wave is not really happening just yet. I think in November, hopefully it will. I'm trusting it will. But I think right now it's just a matter of galvanizing people to really understand what's going on and stop following what they think and not really pay attention to or look into themselves and do their own questioning and research and self-searching.
Sure, that's a tactic, but what kind of policy are we going to support?
We need to also educate people. This is history repeating itself, because people just simply don't know what's gone on before. So they fall into the same traps like they have always done.
So education, getting the vote out, these are tactics, but what specific policy are we trying to support?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's really a policy in play right now, and that's the unfortunate matter, because the right-white is really kind of overshadowing everything and making it just it's such a negative take on anything that's not them. And the fear base is so large and strong, and that's what I think we're trying to suffocate. And politically, I think it's really about getting out the vote and really educating people that don't understand or don't see or don't care or don't realize till it's too late and the rug's been put out from under them and their families.
I think the policy should be the free movement of peoples without borders, so that they can go where opportunity calls and actually fulfill their own dreams and destiny.
Sure. So if we had open borders, how many people do you think would come here like within the period of a year? And do you think our infrastructure and economy would be able to support that without massive problems with unemployment and crime?
It's not about open borders.
Well, that's what he was.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's about open borders, but it's not just allowing everybody and anybody in. You know, there's a screening process that every border deals with. So it's about that as well. But it's also about humaneness and something that we've been dealing with for, you know, it's a by.
We do have open borders within this country. I mean, what defines the United States as different from another country? You can go from state to state. Does crime increase in more in one area than the other? No, if you give everybody a chance, they're going to have the chance to do that. Nobody grows up going, I'm going to be a criminal because that's the only way, because I want to be one. They go up to be criminal because they're not given the opportunities to succeed and thrive.
Sure, because if there's, you know, you don't have employment, you don't have a job, like how else are you going to support yourself, right?
Exactly.
But isn't that a concern if you do have open borders and let's say millions of people come over? We already have an unemployment rate of about 3.8%,
Right.
and there's not an unlimited amount of jobs.
Right.
If people come here, they don't have work. What else are they going to do other than something like
They
crime?
do have work. That's the issue. Look what's going on.
Not everyone. There's lots of people who.
Right,
Yeah.
but there's not a lot of people that have work here anyway, whether there's undocumented immigrants here or not. And they don't want the jobs that the undocumented immigrants have. They don't want to wash dishes or stoop over in the fields 12-hour days and get paid nothing.
Sure, but I think there's a difference between, let's say, 1 million undocumented immigrants here versus like 100 million, right? And would our economy be able to
It's
support?
not 100 million.
No, I didn't say there was. I'm saying
Okay.
there's a difference between having 1 million versus 100
It's
million.
regulation.
You don't support open borders.
I support open borders to a limit, but I think it's, you know, where we've been is a better place than where we're going. And I think it's a matter of regulating and having more dialogue between countries. And I think southern, you know, the Central American countries do have a role as well, and I think they need to step up as well.
Sure. And what do you think about Bernie Sanders' comments about open borders, where he said that's a Koch brothers policy because corporate America wants cheap, illegal immigrant labor in order to boost their corporate profits and hurt the American worker and push wages down?
Yes. So what's the point?
Is that a concern to you at all?
Well, of course it is. But I think, again, it's about the matter of, I don't know, it's hard to, it's really hard to say. It's a tug, but at the same
What
time,
actually happens is it's like water finding its level. You're going to have people here and it's going to increase the labor force, so maybe it'll decrease prices, but you're also going to have people going over to other countries, and hopefully there should be like an equalization.
I think the market will basically kind of sort itself out naturally over time.
I think it does. And the reality is, jobs are changing anyway. With automation, you're not going to have low cost or people having low income jobs so much in the future because those jobs simply won't be around.
Well,
We're going to have to
make
educate people again.
Doesn't that actually make it more of a concern? Because the people who are coming here primarily, they're not computer engineers, they're primarily low-skilled laborers, and if automation's taking over those sectors, unemployment becomes even more of a risk, doesn't it? And that could even create more potential for crime.
Well, I believe what can happen is that you just need to be able to support those people and educate them into whatever jobs are available, or come up with basic income. We are going to have to radically rechange how we do society. So when you're talking about policy, we might have to look at just simply getting away from capitalism and coming up with
like
a
universal
new system.
basic income sort of
Universal
thing.
basic
But isn't
income.
that a concern if you do have a welfare sort of system like that, where it just redistributes wealth just, you know, across the board, and then you have people who immigrate here for that reason, that could just deplete the resources as far as, you know, the tax base and everything.
And then you have all the immigrants who've come up, like, for example, Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, who was a son of a Syrian immigrant. So you have immigrants here who are creating jobs, who are creating potential. And then what do you have? So basically, if you sort of talk about people actually all these people, the influx of masses taking away our jobs. That's the same fear-mongering that has been going on for centuries.
Well, no, not the taking the jobs part necessarily, but when you suggested universal basic income, if people move here specifically for the reason to get a handout, for example, because that would probably happen under a universal basic income system.
That would be true.
If the system here is better where they came from, and it's just free money, isn't that super concerning?
No. Because if it's free money, we are human beings. We have a right to live. We have a right to breathe. We have a right to housing. We have a right to food. We should be, as a society, lifting all of us up to recognize our potential, not trying to point fingers at each other going, oh, he's got more of the green stuff than I do, i.e. money.
By the way, I know a lot of you guys asked about the shirts and when they're coming out. They're going to be coming out soon, but people on Patreon will be getting first dibs, so please consider becoming a supporter on Patreon at www.patreon.com/nuancebro. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell for future videos. So why are we out here today?
I personally am out here because I believe that ICE should be abolished. It was created in the Patriot Act frenzy, the constructed terror state of
Department of Homeland Security, state,
and we already have Immigration and Naturalization Services, we already have Customs and Border Patrol, and we don't need this punitive agency out here weaponizing our border in the way that they are.
Does it really matter like what we call it? I mean, if we're going to basically, put the responsibility back on a different agency, does it really matter if you're just calling it another name?
ICE weaponized the border in a completely other way. It put it within the Department of Homeland Security in a way that it previously had not been. And we can see this in the way that criminal prosecution is happening. Crossing the border is a misdemeanor. And the treatment that is being dealt against people, the punitive measures that are being dealt are a completely other level. When you look at the history of INS, not that it was some benevolent, perfect agency or something like that, but when we look at the arming of Border Patrol and the sending of National Guard to the border, like all of these things have enabled the United States to employ a completely different infrastructure at the border.
So what do you think the solution is?
I think a huge part of it is politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are actively calling for the abolition of ICE as part of their platform. But I also believe that I don't think many of the traditional avenues that our system offers will enable the change to actually happen. Looking at things like Occupy PDX and people shutting down ICE buildings with their bodies, looking at people going to the border and doing actions to help bring people across, because people can come here and ask for asylum at entry points, but what ICE has been doing is they're churning people away before they can get to the entry point. And so U.S. citizens are going and greeting people and saying, I'm going to walk with you, and ICE actually isn't allowed to stop them before they get to the entry point. But U.S. citizens are walking people over the border to ask for asylum. I think it's these kind of actions of people putting their bodies on the line, physically shutting things down, helping bring people over the border. I don't think that when we look at the election of Donald Trump, it wasn't by popular vote. When we look at what's happening with the Supreme Court, like these systems and structures aren't built for justice. And I think too often people rely on them as the only avenue for addressing change.
So you talked about, Occupy PDX, going to the ICE buildings. You talked about, going at the border, helping them cross and declare asylum. Those are more tactics, but what about policy-wise? Like, what are we advocating for?
Yeah, we'll see. There is the aspect where I look at the history of the policy, and so much of this infrastructure was created through Barack Obama. I have very little faith in politicians or their constructions of policies, and I have a lot more faith in the acts of disruption. I think that, when we think of the policy of the movement, I think the policy of the movement should be disruption on a grand scale. When I look at the port shutdowns during the Occupy movement, those are the policies of the movement. When I think about the policies and administration of the state, I think that when we look at genuine efforts of resettlement, that when we look at, for example, and they're not a paragon of justice, but when we look at the city of Toronto and we look at what their city has become through willfully and actively accepting refugees, and you look at what Toronto is as the most multicultural city in the world, and you look at the vibrant culture, the thriving economy, you look at this broader nexus, and policies that genuinely welcome and help settle and integrate, not assimilate, but integrate refugees into the community, it really has an amazing impact on so many layers and levels of the culture.
Sure. So your sign here, you have one that says abolish ICE, open all borders, and on the other side it says abolish prisons. So what do you mean by those?
For me, in terms of abolishing ICE, I spoke to that a bit. The way that it was constructed through the Patriot Act, this administration, weaponizing an infrastructure built by Barack Obama. And for me, the opening of all the borders, more and more, the way that neoliberal regimes work is it allows for the open flow of capital. Money can go wherever it wants, whenever it wants, but people aren't allowed to. And it constructs an inequity where certain things are allowed to travel freely and other things aren't. And it basically prohibits people from pursuing economic opportunity. Simultaneously, people say that immigrants are lazy and stealing our jobs. And I'm like, what are you talking about? People are coming for work. And people are also coming because of the disruption of their governments in their home countries.
Sure, so specifically to the open borders point, what did you think about Bernie Sanders' comments on open borders where he said that's a Koch brothers policy and it's actually designed because the corporate America wants to boost their corporate profits by bringing in cheap illegal immigrant labor, and it actually hurts the American worker and pushes down wages. What do you think about that?
I think that's white supremacy. And I think it's...
You think Bernie Sanders is a white supremacist?
I think all white people are racist.
Well, he's Jewish, so I don't know if all white people would consider him white necessarily.
Yeah, I think we can have lots of debates about his ethnicity in relation to his Judaism or his religious status, but he has white privilege, whether he wants it or not. And I think all white people are racist because we're inculcated in the hegemony of whiteness. And to me, that's an old school labor standpoint, when labor unions used to be anti-immigrant, and you look at the change in the AFL.
Like Cesar Chavez, for example.
Yeah, and you look at the ways that immigrants were received and regarded by the labor movement, but also the AFL-CIO, these other institutions have gone through a shift in being like, these people are a critical part of the economy. I think the biggest issue when people are like, immigrants are stealing our jobs, I'm like, no, shut the fuck up. Corporations are exploiting people who have a questionable legal status. People aren't able to say, I'm not going to get paid $2 an hour, or you stole my wages, or I got hurt on the job and you didn't help me. The illegal immigration is the problem. It's not the people coming, it's the legal structures don't accommodate the actual economy. Like, you look at, I believe it was Georgia, and they created a really strict anti-immigration law, and a bunch of crops rotted on the field. And you're having this in a number of different places. Immigration laws get more strict. Our economy is built around immigrant labor, but it keeps it illegal, it keeps it penalized in order to not offer people any rights. And you look at New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, so much of the reconstruction was done by undocumented people. And people had wages stolen, people got injured and kicked off jobs, and it basically constructs a circumstance where you have people who are workers that don't have any rights. And I think that's why we need open borders. We need to recognize that immigrants are a critical part of the American economy.
About this abolish prisons thing, what does that mean to you?
The current incarceral system and the current system of regional police departments was constructed in the aftermath of Reconstruction. It was constructed in relation to the 13th Amendment, which said slavery was illegal, but you could enslave people if they were prisoners. So they created a regional police system, and they constructed a series of vagrancy laws, loitering laws, and then created chain gangs in a completely new and different kind of way. And we look at the history of the institution of prisons as a mechanism not of reforming people's behavior, but of disciplining, punishing, and securing cheap labor. In that circumstance,
a new Jim Crow type thing.
It's a completely a new Jim Crow, and it's when we look at I brought up that circumstance in Georgia where the immigrants were scared out of the state and fruits rotted on the ground. You know who they brought in after that? Prisoners. We have prisoners making Victoria's Secret products, IBM products, Microsoft products, making
like 75 cents an hour or something.
Yeah, and they can't organize, they can't contest, and they say that it's part of a job training program. And we look at the circumstances and conditions where there was a judge, and I forget which state he was in, but he was getting bribes from a private prison company to give harsher sentences to young people because they make money off of prisoners. And when we look at these conditions and circumstances where prisons are corporations, they're using slave labor, they're taking tax dollars, and they're not reforming people. They're not offering programs to make people's lives better, to improve who they are. They're kidnapping them out of their communities, largely for nonviolent offenses, and then further traumatizing, punishing, brutalizing, and then people wonder why the recidivism rate is what it is.
Sure, so obviously over-incarceration is a huge problem in America. I think we have the highest per capita incarceration incarceration rate in the world. But is the answer to just abolish all prisons, or should we still have some prisons just not over incarcerate people? Because some people, like, you know, if they're going to murder someone, what are we going to do with them?
Yeah, I think there's always this question of like, what are we going to do if someone murders someone? And
it happens a lot too.
Yeah, murder definitely happens. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any form of any kind of disciplinary structure. I'm not saying that there's no circumstance under which anyone should ever be separated from their community or restrained in some kind of fashion. But our prisons are something completely other than that, completely different than that. The circumstances and conditions are mass incarceration, and I think that that needs to be abolished.
So what would you do, like, for people who really should be in prison? There's a lot of bad people in prison for sure that you really don't want in open society. So what would you do, like, in order to, I guess, disciplinary action or whatever?
I am not in the business of imagining disciplinary structures. I am a person who's passionate about contesting them.
We have to offer like viable alternatives. We can't just be like, well, I hate this. Well, that's cool, but what's the alternative, right?
There are a lot of people doing a lot of beautiful, critical thinking around transformative justice, around revolutionary justice, these other modes and avenues of healing, and it's not a point where I'm super well informed, so I'm not going to speak to something I'm not super informed about. My interest and my focus is on critique and abolition, and there are people who are doing other work about other models of discipline. But even just looking at the circumstances with marijuana and the process of decriminalizing and the process of allowing people to get their records expunged. And now people are looking at forgiveness programs.
I started a YouTube channel called Nuance, bro, and I go to rallies and ask people, what are you doing here? Why do you believe? What do you believe? Yeah, basic stuff like that.
Cool. You should probably know this guy's kind of like an alt-right type dude. I saw him at another event.
I'm alt-right?
You probably don't want to be on this.
I'm alt-right?
I mean, I watched your video and I watched how you cut something I said in a really dishonest way. Oh, so I'm going to let him know what's going on here.
What did I cut out that you said?
I mean, you cut out a big chunk of what I said.
I don't think I did. I kept you in full context. Sure. Did I take you out of context?
You did take me out of context.
How so?
I mean, there's like a whole bunch of minutes where it wasn't in context, man.
I don't think so.
It's hilarious to call yourself Nuance and then do that.
I didn't take you out of context.
Anyway, you hear what I'm saying?
You record right now? Yeah, so that guy who just came up to me, I actually interviewed him at the Muslim ban thing. Maybe I'll put a clip in it right now. But he's claiming I took him out of context. If you watch the video, I don't think there's a lot of cuts in there. Like, I kept him in full context. I'm not sure what he's referring to that I took out. But yeah, that was really dishonest, and he called me alt-right, which, if you watch my videos, that's not even close to true. So why are we out here today?
Because the outrage of the people being turned away at the border when this is a country of immigrants, and we all immigrated, almost all.
Sure. And what do you, like, you said they're being turned away at the border, like, what do you mean exactly?
Well, lots of them are being turned away, and the rest of them are being separated from their families if they are allowed in.
Well, not allowed if they cross illegally in, and then they're separated from there.
They're not crossing illegally. The people who are seeking asylum are not illegal.
Well, no, they cross in illegally first, and then they're caught, and then they claim asylum after that. There are some people...
No, actually, there are many of them who are in line waiting to come in legally and seek asylum legally.
Yeah, at the port of entry, they come in. Those
right.
ones, but which also a huge portion of them, the ones who are being separated from their families, who cross in illegally initially, and then when they're caught, they claim asylum after that. So that's the main issue with the families being separated.
No, it isn't.
But it is.
No, it isn't. There are lots of people who are seeking asylum legally who are being illegally separated.
What's your like? You're saying people who come through the legal port of entry and they claim asylum and then they're separated from there?
That's right.
And what's the evidence for that?
There's a lot of evidence for that. All you have to do is watch the interviews, watch the news, watch what's happening there.
I haven't heard any of them say that. It's always been the ones who crossed in illegally initially, and then they were separated because that's the crime they're prosecuting. So when they prosecute,
that's not accurate.
So what are they prosecuting the ones who come in through the legal port of entry for?
They are refusing to allow them to have asylum hearings.
What are they prosecuting them for? Because that's the only way you can separate the children is if they, prosecute them for a crime.
It's the only way you can separate them legally. They're not being separated legally. They're being separated illegally.
What are your sources for this?
Well, also, even if they are coming in illegal, it's illegal for them to separate their children.
Sure, I've heard that argument definitely made. They say it's a violation of international norms and things like that.
It's a violation of U.S. law.
Well, for example, we separate, U.S. citizens. If they commit crimes, we separate them from their children all the time because you can't send the kid with them.
But they've already been convicted.
No, it's even when you arrest them as well. Like, you can't just arrest them and put them in jail temporarily while they await their hearing with their child. They don't do that.
Well, their children are not sent to 3,000 miles away. They are not given to families overnight who they don't know. They at least have the opportunity to have the support of their communities.
Sure, and that's mostly because of the Flores decision, right? Because they can't hold children in detention for more than 20 days. So then they had to
illegally held children in detention for much, much longer.
Well, no, the detention centers, it's 20 days was the maximum because of the Flores decision. Then they transport them over to the Department of Health and Human Services, and
they're still separated.
Well, that they legally had to do that because of the Flores decision. If they were going to prosecute the parents, they had to separate them based on the court's decision. And I think
you're misinformed.
Are you sure?
Yes.
I mean, are you not even willing to consider that you might potentially be misinformed?
I am certain that some people are coming in illegally and that they are being separated because of that. But I am also certain that people are coming in seeking asylum and they're being turned away from the legal process of asylum seeking.
They might be being turned away, but they're not separating the families. Like, they're not prosecuting them for a crime and separating the families.
They haven't been convicted, but they're being separated.
They're not prosecuting them, though. The ones who come through the port of entry.
They're not allowing them to have a hearing that they are legally entitled to.
But that's not the same as separating the families.
They're doing both.
Well, they're doing that to the people who cross in illegally initially.
They're doing that to everyone. They are
definitely not everybody.
They are claiming.
Well, you saw the pictures of the woman with the crying child, right? The one who made it on the cover of Time magazine, for example.
Everybody
right?
saw that.
Yeah,
picture.
but she wasn't separated from her mom.
No, she wasn't. That's
you
true.
said it happened to everybody.
No, they are not allowing people who have legitimate asylum cases to be heard.
That's not the same as separating. You said everyone.
But they're also separating them.
You said it happened to everybody, and it's not happening to everybody.
Okay, nothing happens to everybody.
Okay. So why are we out here today?
Well, being Chinese American, we've gone through the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was over 60 years of having separated families. And we know the intergenerational sociological economic impact that it's had on generations of our community, not only here in the United States, but also in our homeland in China.
If I remember that one correctly, it wasn't about separating families who are already here existing. It was about preventing family members from coming over based on their ethnic origin, right?
Well, actually, we didn't even have families because, like, my father came and he was not allowed to bring. My grandfather came; he was not allowed to bring his wife.
Exactly, that's what I meant. Like, they were prevented from bringing their family over from like China and things like that.
Right.
Sure. So, what are we fighting for here today? What would we like to see?
Well, I think everything that this administration has done has been basically racist. So, anything that has to do with this administration telling what is right or wrong is just been critically inhumane. So I think everything comes down to being racist, and this is enough of that.
And what do you feel like is something racist that Trump has done?
Well, yeah, it's like it's always the Mexicans are always the other people that are cause of the problem. No, the problem stems at home, how we fix things, how we should be showing each other love, not, making your life such that you can only get ahead by beating somebody else down.
Isn't he talking about illegal immigrants specifically? Because a lot of them do come from Mexico and Central America, so he's saying that's a problem, and a lot of the people who come, he says, are, they're rapists, they're killers, but he's not specifically talking about all Mexicans, like, United States citizens, for example.
It's not illegal to ask for asylum.
But isn't it illegal to cross into the country without documents and then claiming asylum after you were caught? Like, it's illegal to cross into the country illegally, right?
No, they're doing this at the border. It's not like they've crossed in.
No, that's the ones who are being separated are the ones who crossed in illegally initially, and then when they're
all being separated.
No, that's not the case, though.
I want to say one thing. It's not even about the separation of families. It's about Trump saying squirrel. I mean, how much of our economic problems can be blamed on actual immigrants and colored people? How many terrorist attacks on our national security is actually being blamed on refugees causing it and immigrants and Muslims? So these are not the real causes. Fundamentally, we're talking about an economy that's not working for working class people, and jobs and education needs to be given to all people. So he's taking the people that are the most vulnerable and blaming them. And it's the same scapegoating that they did to the Chinese and the Japanese Americans and every colored immigrant group that's come in here. These are not the causes of what threatens middle America and what stops them from getting jobs and getting a living and making a living wage.
Sure. And you were talking about like how the working class is being harmed by all of this as well. Do you think that importing millions of people, from Central America, for example, would help the economic conditions in the United States as far as wages are concerned?
It's irrelevant because we're not importing millions of people from Central America. That kind of jargon is what he wants you to believe, and that is not happening. Those are very small amounts of people, and for centuries, Western Europeans, mostly Anglo-Saxons, were able to allow to come here. Not Eastern Europeans, not Italians, not a lot of the people from Africa, not people from the Pacific, East Asians. So it was against the Filipinos, it was against the Gypsies, it was against the Eastern Europeans. So all that is a bunch of rubbish.
Sure. So what do you think the border policy should be as far as, what should our immigration policy be?
Our immigration policy is to maintain family reunification, which he likes to call chain migrations to scare people. We should accept refugees. We need to open our borders and be more global about our thinking about everything, because we're all on this planet together.
So you believe in open borders, like no immigration caps or anything?
And also we need to remember what is making people migrate to our borders. They're caused by, a lot of it, the drug problem. And the market is America. America is what is creating a lot of this gang violence that's happening in Central America and in Mexico. It's because we're consuming the drugs, okay? So if you want to combat people from coming here, deal with and help them to help themselves, okay?
But like I was asking,
them in jail doesn't solve it.
Sure, but do you believe in open borders as a general policy? Do you think that would be a good way forward for America?
We have had open borders when we allow people to come here on working visas. They work, they take care of our elderly, they take care of our child care, they harvest and bring food to our, they actually don't want to live here, a lot of them. They want to go back to their families and bring back that money to their families. Not everybody wants to be here and stay here. We should have an arrangement where people can come and work in our industry, help make our country great, and return home with the income they make. They help themselves and they help this country.
But isn't it a concern that since most of the people who are coming here are generally low-skilled laborers, and we have increasing automation in a lot of sectors, and it's taking over a lot of the low-skilled labor, and we already have an unemployment rate of 3.8%, and if people come here in masses, massive waves, and there's not enough jobs to support those people, the only way they can really support their families by committing crime, or what other alternative is there?
I want to ask, okay, how many people out there are losing jobs to Mexicans that are coming over being busboys?
Oh, I'm not even talking about losing jobs. I'm saying, is there enough?
They're not taking those kinds of jobs. They're not taking the jobs that are in the factories. They're not taking the jobs in the coal mines. They're not taking the jobs in any of the industries that we want our American children to learn to be trained in.
Sure,
so
saying,
that's a false narrative.
Well, no, I'm saying even take Americans totally out of it.
I know where you're coming from, Guy.
Okay, but I'm saying if you're talking just about people who are coming here with low-skilled labor from, Central America and all those and even among themselves, wouldn't there be competition within those jobs, and there wouldn't be enough jobs for everybody in those sectors?
You can easily ask the people that are running the resorts, hotels, and all those industries, the agricultural community, if they're feeling that there are too many immigrants taking those jobs. There are.
No, not in this existing system, because we already have closed borders. Basically, we're turning a lot of people away under the Trump administration. But I'm saying if you had open borders, you don't think there would be too much of an influx where it could create potential problems with unemployment and things like that?
Not at all. Yeah.
All right, guys, that's going to be the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. Social media links are in the description box below. And thanks for tuning in for another episode of Nuance. Bro.